Arith Wood, a striking 27-year-old, was not only beautiful but also exceptionally bright. She was on the verge of earning a PhD in philosophy from Waterloo University while also working as an editor for a philosophy journal. Arith's dream of becoming a professor was within reach. When the summer of 2003 came, Arith chose to spend her vacation visiting her family in Ottawa, Canada. She had a wonderful time with her relatives, enjoying walks together and cooking meals at home. On the morning of August 6th, the young woman went for a run. Upon her return, her caring parents were already waiting for her with a delicious breakfast treat. The day was warm and sunny, so Arith decided to go for a bike ride. Her brother graciously lent her his bicycle. She promised to be back in a couple of hours. That day, her mother planned to go shopping before lunch, waiting for her daughter's return from the ride. Arith loved cycling along the scenic route through the forest, passing the river and cliffs. This trail was a favorite among local cyclists. It was usually a peaceful and safe spot, but not this time. The 27-year-old never came home. Her mother grew worried, and soon a heavy rain began to fall. She realized her daughter wouldn't be riding in such weather, but as more time passed, there was still no sign of her. The family began searching, assuming she might have fallen off her bike and needed assistance. The bike paths stretched throughout the city, and they weren't sure which direction Arith had taken this time. So her relatives searched all over town. Their efforts were fruitless, and when it got dark, they went to the police. Due to the bad weather, the search was postponed until morning. The next day, there was no news about Arith. One of the largest search operations in Ottawa's history began. It involved rescuers, police officers, dog handlers with their canines and helicopters. In total, about 1,000 people, including numerous volunteers. Arith's family actively participated in the search, posting flyers with the girl's photo all around the city. But the first few days yielded no progress. The police turned to the public for help. Soon, a call came from a local resident. She said that on the day of Arith's disappearance, she was in the forest on the bike path and saw a creepy guy with a bicycle there. The witness described him as a young man with a pleasant appearance, well-dressed, but behaving extremely suspiciously. His conduct was frightening. It turned out the stranger had tried to push the girl off her bike and drag her into the bushes. Fortunately, other people appeared on the trail. The perpetrator fell behind and she managed to escape quickly. After this incident, she no longer felt safe on walks and stopped cycling alone. According to the girl, it happened in an area called Green Creek. She suggested that the stranger might have attacked Arith as well. The eyewitness was invited to the police station to create a composite sketch. She described the suspect as a young man, 20-30 years old, light-skinned, dark-haired with a beard and glasses, pleasant-looking and athletically built. The sketch was shown to Arith's family, but they didn't recognize anyone familiar to the missing woman. Many men wore similar glasses and beards at the time, so suspicion could fall on anyone. The investigators decided not to publish the portrait in the media, fearing a way for false calls. The police constantly asked local residents for help, showing Arith's photo. Law enforcement was confident. Such a bright, beautiful girl with a memorable appearance couldn't have gone unnoticed. Someone must have seen her and could provide a lead. This assumption proved true. 16-year-old Laura called the police. She said that on the day of the disappearance, while riding past on her bicycle, she saw Arith on the bike trail. The missing woman was sitting on a rock, seemingly resting. When Laura rode further, she heard a scream. Turning around, the girl saw Arith arguing with some guy. Laura didn't know what to think. Maybe it was just a lover's quarrel. Arith wasn't calling for help, and then she went into the woods with that man. Laura wanted to find out what was happening but got scared. Seeing the approaching storm, the 16-year-old witness hurried home. As she was leaving, she thought she heard someone screaming. The police invited Laura to the station to show her the composite sketch of the stranger. She recognized him. According to the girl, it all happened around 1 p.m. in the same place, Green Creek. Later, the police received several more calls from girls who had encountered this creepy guy on the trail. He attacked them, but the victims were lucky to escape. One woman's call particularly stood out. She recounted how an attractive stranger approached her during a walk. They had a pleasant conversation, but suddenly his behavior changed drastically. The men started grabbing her, but the woman managed to push the attacker away with her bicycle and quickly flee. She didn't even look back, afraid he would catch up. After returning home, the woman told her family about the incident and warned her loved ones to stay away from that place. Oddly, none of the girls who were attacked reported it to the police. The search for Argek concentrated around the creek area. Soon, her bicycle was found, indicating the police were on the right track. Meanwhile, the investigators received another call that became a breakthrough in the case. A man, without giving his name, reported an unpleasant incident in the forest, a terrible accident. Allegedly, he didn't want to harm Adef or take a life. Confused, he decided to get rid of the body. The stranger carried the girl across the creek, dug a small pit, and buried her there, covering the grave with branches. Then he hung up. The police managed to trace the call. It was made from a phone booth 20 minutes away from Ottawa. Law enforcement rushed there, hoping to find witnesses or lift fingerprints or DNA from the receiver, but disappointment awaited them. Someone had thoroughly wiped the handset. Neither eyewitnesses nor surveillance cameras could be found. The search for AR death continued in Green Creek. Dogs trained to detect the smell of corpses arrived at the scene. Soon, the worst fears of the family and the police were confirmed. With the help of the dogs, they managed to find the missing woman's grave located between two trees in a quiet, picturesque spot. Coming closer, the detectives saw the half-buried, naked body of the girl. Likely, the criminal was startled by someone, which is why he buried the victim so sloppily. Criminologists started examining the crime scene, but unfortunately found no evidence, no fingerprints or DNA. The medical examiner confirmed it was Arith Wood. She died a horrific, agonizing death that didn't resemble an accident at all, contrary to what the stranger said in his conversation with the police. The cause of death was drowning. Algae were found in her lungs, so the girl was still alive when she ended up in the water. Despite the body being found naked, the medical examiners didn't find unequivocal signs of rape, although they didn't rule it out. The police believed the crime was sexually motivated. In their opinion, the stranger hunted girls in a deserted place for this purpose. Otherwise, what else could have driven him? The detectives needed to catch the criminal urgently to avoid new victims. They were convinced he had attacked several girls and had already killed one. How far could the maniac go? The police decided to publish a composite sketch of the suspect in the media, asking the public for help in identifying him. Investigators received about 4,000 calls with leads and began processing them, which took a lot of time. On September 10th, the police released important information about the suspect. It turned out that the girls who saw the stranger in the forest had noticed one detail. He had an eagle tattoo on his left shoulder. This was a crucial lead that could help track down the criminal. The media published a sketch of the tattoo, after which several calls came to the police. People reported acquaintances with bird tattoos on their faces, necks, or backs. However, this information led nowhere. In April 2004, while processing another batch of calls, investigators came across an important clue. A man claimed he knew the killer. The person lived in the area and was riding a bicycle in the Green Creek vicinity at the time of the crime. The detectives were interested in this information and invited the specified suspect for a conversation. When the guy entered the police station, the investigators were amazed. He matched the criminal's description both in appearance and age. During the conversation, the young man was noticeably nervous. He said he often rode his bike along that trail, not understanding what the issue was. When the police asked him to show his shoulder, an eagle tattoo was found there. It turned out that the man had previously had problems with the law. He became the prime suspect. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. The entire time, the suspect answered questions defiantly and aggressively. He said about himself, "I'm like a scorpion under a rock. You never know what I'm going to do." The guy had no alibi, but couldn't say what he was doing on the day of Arndet's disappearance. However, he denied involvement in the girl's murder. There was insufficient evidence against him, so the suspect was released but placed under surveillance. A few weeks later, he was invited for questioning again. The detectives had gathered a lot of information about him and carefully prepared their questions. They also suggested the young man take a polygraph test. The suspect agreed and easily passed all the tests. The police couldn't believe it but had to let him go, dropping all suspicions. The investigation had reached a dead end. The Ottawa police announced a $50,000 reward for any information that would help solve the case. It was the largest amount law enforcement had ever offered under similar circumstances. Soon, about 5,000 calls with leads came in which the police began to check. One portion of information mentioned the name Christopher Myers, which caught the investigators' attention. It turned out he had previous convictions for selling prohibited substances. Colleagues described 25-year-old Chris as a quiet, non-confrontational, and even inconspicuous guy who worked as a janitor. His face was remarkably similar to the composite sketch of the suspect. Moreover, he had the same beard. The police were delighted, thinking they had finally found the right man. But it turned out Christopher had an alibi for the day of Ardeth's disappearance. The landlady of the apartment he was renting claimed that on August 6, 2003, the young man was at home in the morning and then went to work at a restaurant. This surprised the police because a year had already passed. How could the woman remember the details of that day so clearly? Another problem arose. Christopher didn't have an eagle tattoo on his shoulder, although witnesses a few weeks later, another similar attack occurred. In the evening, a girl who closely resembled Ardeth was walking alone across a bridge when she heard someone walking behind her. Turning around, she saw an attractive man on a bicycle. The girl had no intention of making acquaintances or talking and asked to be left alone. The man rode past her, and just as she sighed with relief, the stranger turned his bicycle around and rushed straight at her. There was no one around who could help. The attacker jumped off his bike and forcibly dragged the victim into the bushes. The girl screamed very loudly, which seemed to frighten the assailant. He fled. The victim went to the police. Other investigators took on this case. Everyone assumed it was an attempted robbery, and the detectives investigating Arith's disappearance found out about the incident much later. In May, another attack occurred on a tall, blonde woman similar to the missing person. The girl was returning late in the evening from a party when a stranger approached her and tried to strike up a conversation. She asked to be left alone. Then he started asking for help, claiming he was lost. The girl explained where he should go, and he left. She breathed a sigh of relief, but literally 10 minutes later, he attacked her from the bushes. The assailant furiously began strangling her, twisting her neck. At that moment, the girl thought it was the end, but she continued to resist, screaming, hitting him, biting. Her screams attracted the attention of the residents of the building, who came out to see what was happening. This frightened the criminal and he fled. But this time, he made a serious mistake. In his haste, he dropped his phone. Investigators established that the mobile belonged to Christopher Myers, whom they suspected in the Arith murder case. The puzzle came together. Chris committed all the similar crimes. He chose girls with similar appearances, blondes, and attacked them. Christopher was brought in for questioning, but he wasn't in a hurry to confess to the murder. He said he had never been to Green Creek, had never seen Ardeth, and wasn't involved in the other attacks. Chris complained about mental health issues and uncontrollable aggression, but insisted he hadn't caused physical harm to anyone. The detectives noticed he had crooked teeth and persuaded him to take a polygraph test. The test lasted 5 hours, and Chris failed it miserably. But despite this, he still continued to claim his innocence, saying the polygraph was wrong. Since the results of the lie detector test weren't considered evidence, the suspect had to be released. For the next 5 months, detectives gathered evidence against him, interrogating everyone who knew Christopher, relatives, friends, colleagues, and his ex-girlfriend. It turned out Christopher was born into a dysfunctional family of alcoholics. His difficult childhood was accompanied by the development of various mental disorders, attention deficit disorder and schizoid disorder. Chris was taken from his birth family and adopted by another couple. The adoptive parents treated the boy with love, but he was uncontrollable. They couldn't cope with raising the troubled child and returned him to the orphanage when Chris turned 12. As he grew older, he seemed to become an ordinary, normal guy. Christopher graduated from school, entered university, socialized with friends, and lived in a dormitory. But his roommate considered Chris abnormal. He told creepy stories that frightened her. Eventually, she kicked him out of the room. Chris's ex-girlfriend revealed that he loved cycling along the trails of Ottawa and was fascinated by the picturesque scenery. She also disclosed his main secret. Christopher enjoyed temporary tattoos. For a while, he had the exact image of an eagle on his shoulder. The girl was shown a sketch of the tattoo, and she confirmed that he had the same one on his left shoulder. Christopher was summoned for questioning on October 13, 2005. He was placed in a very cramped interrogation room. This time, the conversation was conducted by burly men who pushed their chairs right up against Chris. All this put tremendous psychological pressure on the suspect. The investigators started with simple words. "We know everything about you, Chris. We know it was you who killed our death." Christopher responded evasively. 3 hours later, he began to give testimony, confused and inconsistent. Chris admitted that he was in Green Creek that day and met Arith. Struck by her beauty, he decided to get acquainted. He started giving compliments, chatting nicely, and then invited the girl into the woods, and she agreed. Once there, Christopher began hugging and kissing her, showing the detectives exactly how. And then, according to him, it all ended. Arith recoiled from him. Apparently, she didn't like his manners. She ran away, but fell into the creek. Christopher tried to save the girl, but failed. He wanted to portray himself as a hero, but this absolutely didn't correspond to his subsequent actions. For some reason, he pulled Arda's body out of the water, undressed it, and buried it. When the policeman stated that Chris was going to be charged with murder, he immediately retracted his words. "No, I never met her. It was a joke. I took all the information from the newspapers." The detective had to have a serious one-on-one conversation with him. Eventually, Chris confessed to killing Arith. He even drew a map with the trails in Green Creek where he met the girl. On it, he marked another person, Laura, who saw him with the victim in the forest. Laura recognized the suspect as the same man she had seen then. Christopher was arrested on October 20, 2005. He agreed to go to the crime scene to recreate the events. But when they arrived at the indicated trail, Christopher suddenly declared that it wasn't the right location, claiming everything happened elsewhere, although everything matched. Christopher had an unstable psyche. He would give testimony and then retract his words. Later, he also confessed to other attacks on girls. He was charged with additional crimes for these offenses. At the trial, the lawyer stated that Christopher was just a troubled young man. At first, the accused denied his previous confessions. But later, on the advice of his defense attorney, he decided to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty. On January 8, 2008, 5 years after the murder, the defendant confessed to the crime, but refused to disclose the motives and details. Later, he also admitted to the other attacks. The prosecution believed that on that day, Chris wasn't on the forest trail by chance. He was stalking his prey like a hunter. He attacked several girls who were lucky enough to escape. The likely motive was sexual assault. Arith was unlucky that day. She was Christopher's type, an attractive blonde. He tried to get acquainted with her, but something went wrong, and an argument broke out between them, which was overheard by a teenage girl riding by. Under some pretext, the killer managed to lure Arith into the woods. There, he attacked her, started undressing her, intending to rape her. To save herself, the girl ran away and jumped into the creek. Chris rushed after her, caught up, and drowned her, then buried the body. The victim's parents agreed with the prosecution's version. According to them, Arith was a good swimmer and couldn't have drowned in the creek. In their opinion, the defendant deliberately drowned the girl. However, it remained a mystery to them how Christopher managed to convince Arith to go into the woods with him. As part of the deal with the investigation, Christopher pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole only after 10 years. In 2020, he filed a relevant petition, but the commission rejected it, recognizing the high risk of repeated crimes against women. In 2007, a plaque in memory of our death was installed on one of the centuries-old oaks in Green Creek Park. And in 2017, during a powerful thunderstorm, just like on the day of a murder, lightning struck the same tree. The oak suffered serious damage, and experts didn't believe it would survive. But a miracle happened. The mighty tree withstood. It still grows as a living monument to the girl who was killed nearby. Scott Dean Ponder, born on February 7, 1973, was raised by his loving family, including his mother Beverly Guy and stepfather Terry Guy. From a young age, Scott developed a passion for cars and motorbikes, which his parents wholeheartedly supported, encouraging him to hone his riding skills. When he came of age, they even helped him obtain a racer's license. Scott soon embraced racing as a way of life, competing at the Daytona Motor Speedway in Florida. His sharp skills and impressive racing abilities earned him numerous admirers, making him a local hero in Chesney. Scott was also very sociable and enjoyed spending time with large groups of friends, who equally cherished his company. In the late 1990s, Scott came up with the idea for Superbike Motorsports, starting the venture in his grandmother's backyard where he would repair bikes. Over time, he expanded the operation, eventually upgrading to a one-car garage in 2001. He invited his best friend, Brian Lucas, to join him as a co-partner, and together, they began to grow their business. They partnered with Suzuki to become a dealership, and their business quickly expanded in a short period. Brian, who initially worked part-time, left his job to become the full-time manager of the store. Thanks to their hard work and expertise, the duo began attracting a large number of customers, and the business flourished. Though they were salesmen, they were always dedicated to ensuring their customers had a thorough understanding of bikes and racing. Scott's mother, who had originally visited the store only occasionally, began to make regular trips as well. Soon she took up the job of taking care of the accounting, payroll, cash drops, and other such work. With the trio, the business boomed, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott decided to attend an industry convention in Chicago. It was during this trip that Scott met his wife Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They immediately clicked and started to enjoy each other's company, thus meeting up with each other often. As their relationship grew stronger, they decided to get married. Their love life, both before and after their marriage, married that of a fairy tale where the love grew stronger every passing day. To complete their family, Scott and Melissa decided to have a baby, but unfortunately for them, none of their attempts were bearing any fruit. Frustrated, the couple sought medical attention and advice, and finally, after months of struggles, Melissa was pregnant with a little baby boy in October of 2003. With millions of sales in the very first year of business, Scott knew he had to expand his store even more. In order to do this, he required more hands on deck and decided to hire a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was quite well known around town for his skilled use of the wrench that attracted Scott towards him. The four of them, Scott, Everly, Brian, and Chris, became a sort of a dream team, and their business started to gain attention even outside the small town of Chesney. Everything was going perfectly for the young and talented Scott Ponder until the arrival of his doomsday. Living such a perfect life, Scott never matched his happiness to be cut short. But this was what happened on November 6, 2003. It was a normal day with not a cloud in the sky, and the sun was beaming, but it was not the case at the Superbike Motorsports. Scott and the others started their day at the shop like any other. There were few customers browsing items in the store. One of them was Kelly Sisk, who had his 4-year-old son with him. He was going to buy a go-kart for his family, and after paying for it, he hung around in the shop for a little while longer. Brian actually had the day off because he was paying to go on a holiday with his family, but he was called in by Scott because there was a customer who said that the bike was not tended to as they promised. Brian came to the shop and immediately started to work on the customer's bike. Scott was tending to another customer when Beverly came by after taking Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemo. She used to take deposits for her son to the bank, and that day she was intending to do the same. When she dropped by, she started to help Scott a little at the counter since she was planning to go to the bank much later. At around 2:30 p.m., Scott's friend Noah Lee called the shop. Beverly answered the phone and he asked if he could stop by the shop, and it would only take him 7 minutes for him to reach the shop, to which Beverly agreed. The conversation was short, and after putting the phone back down, Beverly decided to use the bathroom. In the span of 7 minutes, all 4 people in the shop, Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, were savagely shot to death in the Superbike Motorsports premises. At 3 p.m. when Scott's friend, Noah, came by, he saw Scott and Brian lying at the front of the shop as still as statues. At first, he felt they were playing a trick on him. He even lightly kicked both of them, telling them to stop messing with them, until he saw the pool of blood underneath their bodies and immediately dial 911. Police and paramedics immediately rushed to the scene. After all, it was the first ever quadruple murder in such a small town like Chesney. The news of the homicide spread like wildfire, and not only the victim's family but a dozen other people gathered at the crime scene in order to catch a glimpse. The police wasted no time and immediately started their investigation. They found mechanic Chris' body at the back of the shop. It was bent over as if he was working on a bike right before he was robbed of his life. Next Fit found Beverly's body inside the shop right in front of the bathroom. The police believed she was ambushed right when she came out of the bathroom. The police found Brian Scott's bodies both lying at the front of the store. Brian's body was closer to the door near the sidewalk, while Scott's body was closer to one of the parked cars in the parking lot. This, the police inferred, was maybe because both Scott and Bri were trying to run for their lives. They went inside probably on hearing the gunshots and came face to face with the shooter. And on seeing the dead bodies of Chris and Beverly, they immediately ran out the door, but their attempt to escape failed miserably. The police and forensic teams searched the crime scene thoroughly and gathered blood samples and other evidence from the crime scene. This was an execution-style homicide where the shooter entered the shop with the motive to murder the people present there and shot them in the chest and head point blank. Scott's wife Melissa got a call about the shooting and immediately rushed to the scene. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation, and it didn't take them long to arrive at their first clue. From the statements made by a few passerbys in the area at the time of the murder, they declared to have spotted a couple loitering near the shop. Sketches of the suspects were drawn during the questioning of these eyewitnesses, and the detectives immediately circulated the pictures all over South Carolina. The detectives speculated that the man was the one who shot the victims, Chris and Beverly, at the back, while the woman was distracting the 2 men, Scott and Brian, up front. When the man came to the front where the 2 men were, these shot them. This was just mere speculation by the detectives, and none of the facts in this theory were proven. Months passed and police couldn't find any clue regarding the case. Extensive media coverage of the case started putting pressure into the detectives as they started to revisit the crime from a different perspective. And sure enough, a breakthrough appeared. Detectives started to do a thorough study of the victims' past and current lifestyles. And though Scott, Beverly, and Brian's backgrounds came out to be clean, it was not the same for the mechanic Chris Sherbert. When detectives checked Chris' previous job, the news of a drug connection came into the picture. The detectives found out that Chris might have been involved with the wrong company and was also responsible for smuggling drugs. Moreover, Chris was scheduled to go to court the following Monday before the murder took place. It was 2003 when drug smuggling and abuse was increasing every single day, and the Gliss were hoping to arrest the key criminal players to eradicate the root cause of drug abuse, especially among young teens. The detectives and the public now started to wonder if this quadruple homicide took place with a motive to murder only Chris, and the other 3 victims were just collateral damage. They even started to speculate that maybe the people involved in this drug business felt that Chris would give evidence against them in court on Monday and decided to end his life. The detective said that this could be a possibility since Chris was the one who was shot first. However, regarding this path of speculation, no evidence was found by the police. Therefore, the investigation stalled again. Finally, after a whole year, the detectives approached the case from a completely different angle once again. The detectives found that Brian, Scott's friend and co-worker, was looking for a house weeks before the murder, but strangely enough, his wife Robin had no idea regarding this decision taken by him. Later, Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, spoke of the unhappy and strained marriage between the pair and how Brian was planning to move out to live alone. Though this didn't seem to have a connection to the shooting, a discovery made by the detectives a few days later brought out a shocking revelation to the case. This quadruple homicide took the lives of 4 people and broke the hearts of many others. The victims' families were coping with the hard times, but it was especially hard for Melissa. Her life was perfect before it all came crashing down when her beloved husband was shot. Despite all this, Melissa knew she couldn't give up now that she had a new reason to continue living, and that was her son. When Melissa's son, Scott Ponder Jr., was born in June 2004, Melissa was still being called upon by the police at intervals for interrogation. In one such incident, the police collected the DNA sample of Scott Jr. from a discharged diaper when Melissa had changed him at the station itself. The results of the DNA test left everyone dumbfounded. According to the reports, Scott Jr. was not the child of Scott, but Brian, since his DNA matched with Brian's found at the crime scene. This created tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who kept asking her if this was true. The detectives started to approach this case from the point of a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Questions about her being unfaithful to her husband spread all throughout the neighborhood. Moreover, Brian's mother stated that it was possible for Brian to have an affair, considering how unhappy Brian was in his marriage, and the thought of divorce might have crossed his head at times. Melissa was called multiple times to the police station for interrogation about her affair, but she was resolute. She said that both she and Scott had struggled a lot to conceive this baby, and Scott you knew was undoubtedly Scott Ponder's child. She later told about how she was harassed every day by the same questions when she knew it was hers and Scott's baby. For the next year and a half, detectives kept track of every move made by Melissa in order to find a breakthrough. Finally, after 18 months, however, the detectives claimed that there must have been a mistake regarding the blood sample collected at the crime scene. The detectives stated that they conducted a DNA test for Beverly and Scott from the blood sample collected from the crime scene, and the results did not match. In the reports, Brian's DNA matched Beverly's when clearly Scott was the son of Beverly. At this point, the detectives knew that they had made a grave mistake. They put the wrong name in the blood sample of Scott and Brian collected from the crime scene, since both the bodies of Scott and Brian were lying next to each other. This cleared up all the accusations laid against Melissa. Disregarding the love triangle fairy, detectives now started to link the case with another homicide just 30 miles away that had happened just 5 months before the Superbike Motorsports homicide. On May 16, 2003, the people of Greer, South Carolina, heard the news of a triple homicide that took place in the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. Sylvia Holtzclaw was on duty that day, though she had a day off. Soon, a local couple, Ebb and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank. At around 1:30 p.m., a 911 call went through to the Greer Police Department regarding a shooting that had taken place in the Bluewood Savings Bank, where Sylvia, Ebb, and Maggie were shot to death. Just like in the Superbike Motorsports, the shooting happened in broad daylight with no witnesses available. When police checked the CCTV footage, they saw a red car that was driving to the bank at around 1:24 p.m., and it was soon again when it was driving back from the bank 3 minutes after the incident. Coincidentally, a similar red car was spotted during the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports. Detectives started to hunt down the right car and found a clue that it was stolen by 39-year-old Emerson Wright from a rental lock days before the homicide. The police concluded that he'd entered the bank to rob, but panicked and shot the couple when they tried to intervene. Unfortunately, the detectives never got to question Emerson regarding the bank and the Superbike Motorsports murder because of how incidents unfurled 2 years later in another car chase involving him and the Georgia State Police. He was wanted for a series of burglaries in the Atlanta area. When he was chased by the state trooper, he crashed his car, got out, and shot himself with a single gunshot wound to his head. Later, the detectives declared that though there are similarities between the two cases, they didn't believe that the two cases were connected. Left with no clues or possible theories to continue their investigation, the quadruple homicide at the Superbike Motorsports turned into a cold case months later in 2004. For 13 years, Melissa, along with the other families of the victims, didn't stop with their efforts of finding any clue that might lead them to the person who was responsible for this atrocious crime, but to no avail. Finally, A ray of hope shone on them when the cold case of the quadruple murder that took place on November 6, 2003 in Superbike Motorsports reopened when the detectives got a breakthrough in the case in 2016, 13 years after the crime had been committed. The man behind the shooting came into the spotlight when he was arrested for a different murder that he committed, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports quadruple murder. This man was 45-year-old Todd Kohlhepp. Todd was born on March 7, 1971 to mother Reggie Tague and father William Samsel. His parents divorced when he was 2 years old, and though he started to live with his mother and a new boyfriend, he wanted to spend more time with his biological father. Todd was extremely aggressive and hyper, at times not having self-resistance over his anger issues. He was a troublesome kid and showed hostility towards animals when he was in nursery school. He killed a goldfish with Clorox bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. He spent 3.5 months in Georgia Psychiatric Hospital, but there seemed to be no change in his aggressive behavior. His mother, Reggie, finally decided to send him to his father, William, hoping a change in the environment would help his behavior. On November 25, 1986, Todd planned a kidnapping of a girl named Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona. He knocked on her door, threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and demanded for her to follow him to his house. He brought her to his home, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and then proceeded to assault her. Afterwards, he walked her home and threatened to kill the entire family if she told anyone about what had happened. Christy, however, confessed everything to her parents, and her father called 911 immediately. Kohlhepp was charged with kidnapping, actual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge and the other charges were dropped. When he was released, Todd was a changed man. He started to work for himself and even got a job. No further complaints were heard against them until 2016. On August 31, 2016, 30-year-old Carla Brown and her boyfriend, the 32-year-old Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen going to Todd's house to remove brush from one of Todd's properties. On November 3, 2016, investigators found Carla chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on the property of Todd. Later, investigators also retrieved the body of Charlie that had multiple gunshot wounds in it. Kaye told the detectives that Todd shot Charlie and took her chained up. He would always assault her in a barbaric manner and threatened her not to find ways to escape. Todd was immediately arrested by the police and taken in for questioning. During this arrest, Todd confessed to being the person behind the shooting that took place at the Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. When Todd was called in for the interrogation on November 5, 2016, he started to tell the detectives everything that happened on November 6, 2003. He didn't confess out of fear or guilt, but merely as if recalling a memory. He said that he bought a Suzuki GSX-R 750 from Superbike Motorsports, but just days after buying the bike, he realized he couldn't ride it. Having no prior knowledge of riding a bike, Todd then decided to exchange the bike for another one that would be much easier to ride for a beginner such as Todd. He then told the detective that he was mocked by Scott and Brian for his inability to ride such a bike. The bike exchange didn't take place that day and Todd returned home. 14 days after the purchase, the bike got stolen from the front of the apartment complex where Todd lived. He filed the police complaint regarding the stolen bike, but the police never found the vehicle. Todd also mentioned that even the law enforcement officer made fun of him. He lost a $1,000 deposit for insurance, but neither the police nor the shop contacted him after that regarding the stolen bike. Todd started college and went to Greenville Tech. His attraction towards bikes never faded, and soon he found himself going back to the Superbike Motorsports once again. He told the police that when he was browsing through the bikes in the shop, both Scott and Brian were giving negative remarks about him. Since then, whenever Ton visited the shop, the two men would mock and laugh at him. One day, he decided to take up a Redden 92 FS with them when he went to the shop. He waited for the customers to leave and the shop was left with only Scott, Brian, Chris, and Beverly. Todd savagely shot all the victims to death. Later he added that Beverly was not a target. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hearing the confession made by Todd gave the victims' families the long-drawn justice and the closure that they were seeking for the past. Later, Todd also confessed to have killed 3 more people who were Johnny Joe when Megan Lee Coxey and Charlie David Carver. These 3 victims also died due to gunshots fired by Todd Culheap. In the case of Todd Culheap, even though it was a serial killer case, there was no trial that took place. Instead, prosecutors spoke to the families of those he'd murdered as well as to the survivor and decided to give him a plea deal instead of taking him to trial, where the state offered Todd life without the possibility of parole, which he accepted only 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years full assault and 30 years for kidnapping. Not having a trial did not give the satisfaction to the victims' families regarding the justice that was needed to be served. It also angered the general public. It's not fair for families to wait years for justice, 7th Circuit Solicitor Barry Bynett later told reporters. But Scott Ponder's wife Melissa said that she was finally relieved to get closure regarding her husband's death after all these years. All the family members and relatives of victims came together to hold a candlelight vigil in remembrance of their beloved ones whom they'd lost to the hands of a serial killer. After 13 drawn-out years of pain and suffering, the victims' families were grateful to finally learn what exactly happened to their loved ones. In one interview, Scott's wife Melissa did state that the reason Todd gave for murdering Scott and the others didn't sit right with her, since she knew Scott well enough to know that he'd never make fun of someone and make them feel little front of him. Nevertheless, she was grateful that justice had finally been served. The public was left disturbed by the lack of empathy and the casual behavior that Taunt showed while being interrogated by the police or during his court appearances. They wanted Taunt to receive the death penalty since he was a monster to society. Today's case was truly a twisted and disturbing one. St. Patrick's Day in 1995 fell on the Friday of spring break in Pickering, Ontario. After a night of partying that began on March 16th, a group of 6 friends decided to go to a nearby marina in the early morning hours of the holiday. Around 12:50 a.m. on March 17th, 18-year-old Chad Smith, along with 17-year-olds Jay Boyle, Michael Cummins, Robbie Rumbold, Danny Higgins, and Jamie LaFave, left the party never to be seen again. The 6 boys would later become known as the Lost Boys of Pickering. One of the first to notice something was wrong was Jay Boyle's girlfriend, Monique. The couple lived together in a basement apartment to raise their infant daughter, Kiara, and she became alarmed when Jay didn't return home. As word spread among their friends that all 6 boys were missing, their families began searching for them. The police were not overly concerned about the boys until the afternoon of Saturday, March 18th, more than 36 hours after they had left the party. At that point, investigators connected the boys' statement about going to find a boat with 2 thefts reported at marinas on Frenchman's Bay off of Lake Ontario. A Boston Whaler replica was reported stolen from the East Shore Marina on the morning of St. Patrick's Day, and a water tricycle was stolen from a nearby marina the same day. Fearing that the boys may have drunkenly gone out on Lake Ontario in the stolen vessels and accidentally capsized, police departments along the lake, as well as the military, joined forces to search Lake Ontario by boat and from the air. No sign of the missing boys or the missing vessels were ever found. Security footage at the East Shore Marina shows Robbie, Michael, and Jamie entering the East Shore Marina at 1:48 a.m. on March 17th. It is suspected that Jay, Danny, and Chad were at the other marina taking the water tricycle. It is unknown why the boys decided to split off into 2 groups. Someone living near the marina reported hearing a motorized boat going out onto Lake Ontario between 2:30 and 3 a.m. The theory that the boys either drowned or were lost to hypothermia in the frigid waters of Lake Ontario after losing control of their vessels during their joyride seems like the obvious answer to the mystery. However, many find it suspicious that no evidence was found in the search of the lake. Neither vessel, none of the boys, or any of their belongings have ever been found. A gas can that may have belonged to the stolen motorboat eventually washed up on the shores of Wilson, New York across the lake, but it has not definitively been tied to the stolen boat. While both vessels certainly could have sunk somewhere they could not be found, and none of the bodies of any of the boys could have ever surfaced, it is surprising that absolutely everything from both vessels and all 6 boys could never be found simply by chance. In April of 1998, large grates at the Sir Adam Beck hydroelectric generating station in Queenston, near the Niagara River, were cleaned for the first time in 7 years. Workers discovered 2 sets of remains stuck in them. One of them was surrounded by a pair of red jeans. Jay Boyle was believed to have been wearing a pair of red Levi jeans the night he vanished. When Jay's sister Amanda found the report of these remains, she began pushing for police to investigate the possibility that Jay had finally been located. It would take several years, a few controversies, and several advances in technology before DNA finally proved that the remains were not Jay's in December 2018. The families of the 6 boys continued to gather at Lake Ontario on St. Patrick's Day to mark each anniversary of the boys' disappearances. In 2007, 27-year-old Chantel McDougall lived just outside of Nannup, a small town in Western Australia, with her 45-year-old partner, Simon Cadwell, their 6-year-old daughter Layla, and family friend, Tony Poppich. While Simon rarely left the house, Chantal worked at multiple jobs, although Simon disapproved of her socializing with her co-workers from any of them, despite her outgoing nature. Simon was described by those who knew the couple as a controlling partner, who Chantel would always trail behind instead of walking beside. One factor in this dynamic in their relationship was the age difference between the two. Chantel had been just 17 when she met the then 35-year-old Cadwell at an ashram in 1997. At the time, Simon was working on his second book, Servers of the Divine Plan. Cadwell believed that the world was coming to the end of a 75,000-year cycle, and that not everyone would be spiritually developed enough to ascend to the next higher spiritual plane once the physical world was gone. He would eventually develop an online group known as the Truth Fellowship. Followers of Cadwell would use an online forum called The Gateway to discuss his ideas. Cadwell was known on the forum 1998. Chantal moved 1998. Chantel moved into the home Cadwell shared with his partner, a woman named Deborah, to help take care of their son Daniel, eventually being joined by a third woman. When Chantel became pregnant with Layla, Deborah ended her relationship with Simon and took their son with her when she left. By the time Layla was born, the third woman had ceased living with them as well. Chantel and Simon moved around Western Australia, picking up Tony Poppich along the way, ending up outside of Nannup in 2004. On July 13, 2007, Chantel, Simon, Tony, and Layla traveled to Busselton to sell Chantel's car to a dealership there. The group was then seen getting into a car waiting nearby. Chantel deposited the $4,000 she received for her car, and her bank account was never touched again, nor were Simon or Tony's accounts. The following day, the family sold their 2 long-haired dachshunds. The woman who bought them, Carolyn French, would be the last known person to see Chantal. She said Chantal appeared anxious when she came to collect the dogs. The same day, Chantal called her parents and told them that they were going to Brazil to live amongst people with similar spiritual beliefs. She said that Simon had already left and that she and Layla were about to follow. Layla's passport had arrived at their home the last time Chantel's parents had been visiting a few months before, so they were not surprised that they were going to be traveling abroad. However, when 3 months passed and they had not come back to Australia or made any sort of contact from Brazil, the McDougalls reported their daughter and granddaughter missing. The family's home appeared to have been left abruptly. While the group had spent some time making certain arrangements, like selling their cars and rehoming the dogs, they had not taken such care with the home. Perishable food was left out, and they had not gotten rid of any of their furniture. Their clothing was gone, but they had left behind their computer, their wallets, their credit cards, and other important items they would have needed for international travel. A note addressed to their landlords was left on the door of the house and had been discovered on July 19th. It said that due to the lack of sleep caused by the electromagnetic fields, a reference to a transformer installed on a power pole near the home recently that Simon had claimed would be the death of him, the tenants had no choice but to abruptly move overseas to Brazil. The installation of this transformer had caused a major escalation in Simon's already typically erratic behavior. He would rant and rave about how it was being put there by the government as an attack on him and his daughter, and he had buried magnets in his yard to counteract the electromagnetic waves he believed the transformer was using to attack him. According to one of his neighbors, Simon's demeanor went from highly agitated to surprisingly calm, just prior to his disappearance. Two major discoveries were made in the investigation that convinced authorities that there was more to the story than a group of people simply moving away. The first was the fact that there was no record of Chantel, Layla, Simon, or Tony leaving Australia or entering Brazil. No sightings of individuals matching the group's description were ever reported in Rio Branco, the city they planned to travel to and live outside of. This raised concerns that the story about going to Brazil was merely a cover for some other plan inspired by their alternative spiritual beliefs. The second concerning fact was Simon Cadwell's true identity. Police discovered Simon Cadwell was not really Simon Cadwell, but a British national named Gary Feltham. Feltham had stolen the birth certificate of one of his associates in the UK and used it to get a passport and then traveled to the United States, India, and then Australia. In 2013, authorities learned that on July 14, 2007, someone going by the name Jay Roberts and using Tony Poppage's cell phone boarded a train from Bunbury to Perth. Later that day, someone claiming to be Tony Poppage checked into a hostel in Perth and provided Tony's driver's license as identification. The following day, Jay Roberts purchased a ticket for a 7 a.m. train. It is unclear if this person was actually Tony, or if Gary had once again stolen someone's identity to travel. In December 2017, a 3-day-long coroner's inquest was held to examine the evidence in the disappearances. During the course of the inquest, it was revealed that police had failed to follow up on potential sightings of various members of the group and on other potential evidence that is now lost. In May 2018, the coroner, Barry King, after reviewing the evidence presented at the inquest, released a report saying that he could not conclusively decide if the missing people were alive or dead. Chantel's parents, Jim and Catherine, who had fought for the inquest to be held, were frustrated with the lack of new information in the case, but continue to hope that they will one day have answers about what became of their daughter and granddaughter. Saul Salomon met his future wife, Elaine, at a Hollywood bar in 1971. Saul was a recent immigrant from Israel who was working as a taxi driver, selling encyclopedias on the side. Elaine had gotten divorced from her first husband and was raising a young daughter, Michelle. Over the next decade, the couple's lives changed dramatically. They got married and had a son, Mitchell. Saul started his own business, Apollo Fire Extinguishers. As the family's financial situation improved, they bought a house on Lassen Street in the Northridge section of Los Angeles and furnished it lavishly. They owned multiple luxury cars and always had the newest electronics and fashionable clothes. On Wednesday, October 13, 1982, the Salomons' pool began to overflow, and water began pouring into the yard of the neighbor who lived behind them. That neighbor called a friend of the Salomons who lived a few doors down from them on Lassen Street. She and her daughter, who was a friend of Michelle's, walked down to the Salomon house and knocked on the door, but got no answer. She then went back to her own home and called Elaine's cousin, Doreen Laffer. Doreen and Elaine were very close and spoke multiple times a day. Doreen had stopped by the house earlier in the day to drop off some chairs she had borrowed, but no one had been home then either. She had not heard from her cousin in more than a day, which was very unusual. Elaine's mother had seen her on the night of 12th, but had not heard anything from her daughter since. As concerned friends began calling around about the family, they realized that neither 15-year-old Michelle nor 9-year-old Mitchell had been in school that day. Elaine had failed to show up to her regular volunteer position that day as well. Police were called to the home, but they were initially wary to force entry into the home, as they could not see anything they found suspicious outside. Eventually, a sergeant arrived and gave permission to enter the house. Doreen Laffer's husband, Marty, had been on the scene, and he showed the police how to enter the home through a bathroom window at the back of the house. Nothing seemed out of place at first, except for the fact that the security alarm had not gone off when the window had been opened. Marty called his wife to tell her that everything looked perfectly ordinary. He told her that the beds were even made, thinking that the fact that the house was in order would reassure her. Instead, it made her even more upset. According to Doreen, Elaine never bothered to make any of the beds in the house. Nothing else seemed out of place until police examined Michelle's bedroom more closely. The bed was broken, and all of the bedding was missing. There were small blood splatters in the room, and a piece of the carpet had been cut out and covered with a rug from the bathroom. 5 days after the family went missing, passports, pictures, and wallets belonging to the family were found along a highway in Eaton, an hour north of Los Angeles. There were a variety of theories that surrounded the disappearance. Most of them involved rumors of Saul being involved in illicit activities and either being taken out by an enemy or taking his family into hiding. The rumor mill speculated that he was involved with either Israeli organized crime or the Israeli intelligence community. He was accused of running guns or maybe drugs. Those close to him admit that all of his business dealings probably weren't on the up and up, but maintain that the work of probably weren't on the up and up, but maintained that the worst things he could be guilty of were probably insurance or tax fraud. The main suspect in the family's disappearance was Harvey Rader, a British national who owned a repair shop for European cars in Reseda, California called Mr. Motor. Saul Salomon had $20,000 invested in the business. Rader was tied to the last known communications with both Elaine and Saul. Saul had left his home to attend a car auction with Rader on the night of October 12th, the last time he was seen by anyone. Elaine's mother told police he had left around 6 o'clock that night while she was at the house with her daughter. The last known person to speak with Elaine was a friend of hers, Barbara Levy, who was speaking to her on the phone at 11:30 p.m. on October 12th. Elaine had to hang up when the doorbell rang, telling her friend that Harvey was at the door. It is unclear how she knew it was him. Saul's Mercedes-Benz had been found in the parking lot of Mr. Motor. According to Rader, it was there for repairs. Rader had scratches on his hands when he spoke to police on October 14th, but he claimed that they were simply from his job working on car engines. Rader told the police that he and Saul had attended the car auction on the 12th, and that he had dropped off Saul at an Israeli restaurant on Ventura Boulevard around 10 p.m. He then drove Saul's van back to the house on Lassen Street and drove the Mercedes back to Mr. Motor. Rader's story had a few problems. The car auction had ended at 5 p.m., an hour before Saul had even left his house, and the restaurant where Rader claimed to have dropped off Saul had been closed on the night in question. Rader's account of how he got the keys to the Mercedes also changed over time. Rader had a criminal history and questionable business practices, but none of those proved he had harmed the Salomons. More than a year after the family went missing, a new witness came forward to implicate Rader. Ashley Polly was Rader's cousin and had been working for him at Mr. Motor in 1982. After the Salomons went missing, he had returned to the UK. A private investigator working for Elaine's family had been trying to get information about Rader from him and eventually convinced him to contact police in California. Polly was hesitant to return to California to testify against his cousin, so prosecutors offered him immunity from prosecution in exchange for information and eventually his testimony in court. He was escorted back to Los Angeles by Scotland Yard on November 13, 1983. Polly claimed that Saul had demanded the $20,000 he had invested in Mr. Motor back and Rader shot him. The group put Saul in the trunk of a car and drove to his house, where they killed the rest of his family. They buried the bodies in Eaton, near where the family's documents had been found. As believable as Polly's account may be, given Rader's character and the problems with his statements to police, it quickly fell apart. Polly tried to lead investigators to where he claimed the bodies were buried, but they were not there. The surrounding area was searched extensively, but they were still not found. Still, based on Polly's testimony, Rader and Baxter were both arrested and charged with murder. Polly then admitted that Baxter had not been present at the office that night and that he had completely made up the two Italians. The charges against both Rader and Baxter were then dropped. The district attorney then charged Polly with the murders, claiming that Polly had violated his immunity deal by lying, thus voiding it. A Los Angeles municipal court judge ruled that Polly's statements had to be thrown out due to technical issues with the immunity deal and the fact that the prosecutors had pressured him into implicating himself. Since Polly's statements were the only evidence the prosecutor had against him, he was released. Polly returned to his home in London and refused to ever come back to California. Rader, despite not having Polly's testimony and only having circumstantial evidence, the district attorney's office tried Harvey Rader for the murders of Saul, Elaine, Michelle, and Mitchell 3 separate times in 1989, 1990, and 1992. The first two trials ended in mistrials, and Rader was acquitted in a third, largely in part to his defense attorney, raising doubts about whether the family was dead or alive. Elaine, Saul, Michelle, and Mitchell were declared legally dead in 1985 based on Ashley Pauley's statements. Their bodies, however, have never been found. 31-year-old Carly McBride vanished under mysterious circumstances after visiting her ex-boyfriend's house. Following a missing person report, the police launched an investigation. However, it took almost 2 years before authorities were able to answer the question of where Carly had disappeared to. Carly was born on April 14, 1983, to Steve McBride and Lorraine Williams. She was a cheerful and outgoing child, with a close bond to her parents. As she grew older, Carly began to face increasing challenges, including struggles with alcohol and illegal substances. Despite this, she made efforts to overcome these addictions. By 2014, Carly, at 31 years old, lived in Belmont, New South Wales, Australia. She was the mother of 2 children, a 7-year-old son, William, and a 3-year-old daughter, Cadence. Carly's children had different fathers, though specific details about her relationships with her former partners are not readily available. However, it is known that Andrew Easton, Cadence's father, was one of the last people to see Carly. In 2013, Carly checked into a rehabilitation center to overcome her addiction to illegal substances. While there, she met Sale Kenneth Newsom, and their friendship gradually evolved into something more. By August 2014, Carly and Sale were spending nearly all their time together. The couple had fights sometimes, but they seemed to be happy on the surface. On September 30th, 2014, Sale took Carly to Musselbrook, where her 3-year-old daughter Cadence lived with her father, Andrew Easton. Carly came to stay with her for a few hours. She entered the house of her former partner at about 12:30 p.m. Sale didn't stay with her, but they agreed he would return in a few hours. However, when Sale came to pick up Carly, she was no longer there. Carly's ex-partner, Andrew Easton, said they fought, so Carly left. She planned to go to the nearest McDonald's located about a 20-minute walk from Andrew Easton's house. Puzzled that Carly didn't call to tell him where she would be waiting for him, Sale started calling her himself. Since all attempts were unsuccessful, Sale drove towards McDonald's where she allegedly planned to go. Along the way, he looked around hoping to find Carly sitting somewhere waiting for him. He suggested her phone was dead, but Carly was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't at McDonald's where she supposedly went or anywhere near it. Sale drove around the streets of Musselbrook for a while, but it was in vain. Carly seemed to disappear into thin air. When she didn't return home to Belmont that evening, Sale contacted the police. The detectives asked him the details of what had happened. It would be exactly the same thing every time. I would drop her off. She would get out and go to the front door. She would have her daughter in her arms and turn around and wave me off, Newsom said. She would ring me twice and text me twice every visit to let me know she was okay. But on that day, I dropped her off about 12:30 p.m. and things were just different. And I didn't hear from her again. Not a thing. I texted her, I called her, but the phone just rang out. Newsom said he turned up at the house about 4:30 p.m. as usual to pick up Carly, only to be told by her ex that she had left after an argument earlier that afternoon and headed on foot towards a McDonald's restaurant about 1 mile away. Undoubtedly, the following question arose. Did Carly leave her ex-partner's house? Or Andrew Easton was hiding something? His story suggested he was the last person to see her. However, no other witnesses could confirm that Carly really left his house. Police interviewed neighbors and people living along the route Carly would have taken if she had gone to McDonald's. The fact that no one saw her has further increased suspicions about her former partner. Unfortunately, no surveillance cameras near Andrew Easton's house could confirm or deny his words about Carly leaving around 2 p.m. After reviewing the recordings from the surveillance cameras at McDonald's, the investigators found no evidence she was ever there. Police searched fields behind a nearby residential area for clues. However, a chief investigator of this case said nothing particularly remarkable had been found, adding that the investigation would continue. They urged anyone with information about the disappearance of Carly McBride to contact the police department. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, sandals, and a yellow t-shirt, and she was carrying a tan handbag. After obtaining a search warrant, the police examined the house where Carly was seen last. A group of police officers went there hoping to find clues that could shed some light on what happened to the mother of 2 children. But after searching Andrew Easton's house, the police did not find new clues. Nothing there indicated that someone committed a crime in that house. However, investigators did find something suspicious. They discovered Carly's Facebook account got deleted a few hours after she vanished before the official report of her disappearance. This mysterious deletion of her account on a social network raised a lot of questions. Are the account deletion in Carly's disappearance somehow connected? Was she the one to delete her account, or did someone else do it? Why was the account deleted? Perhaps the Facebook messages could tell about what happened, and that's why someone deleted the account. To get answers to these questions, the detectives turned to the U.S. Department of Justice, hoping the latter would help restore Carly's account and determine who could have deleted it. Facebook data analysis is done at the company's headquarters in Menlo Park, California, but Sergeant Wright said Miss McBride's Facebook friends could help New South Wales Police. We're asking if anyone may have been in contact with Carly via Facebook or any other social media in the days leading up to her disappearance. If anyone noticed anything unusual, if they could come forward and let us know, he said. Given the timing of the Facebook page being shut down and in the context of the disappearance, we think it's hugely suspicious, but it's also something that could hold some vital information about what happened to Carly. Carly's parents didn't believe their daughter had just fled to start a new life. Close friend and flatmate Carly Smith said nothing appeared out of the ordinary as she spoke with Carly on the phone as she traveled to Muswell Brook. She was so down to earth. I would call her a free spirit. She was easygoing. She just loved life, Miss Smith said. She was always there for her friends. If you were having a bad day, she just knew, and she would be in contact. And she also made a plea. We all wake every day not knowing what happened, not knowing where she is, she said. You have to have a conscience. Come forward with some news. Just give us something. The police thoroughly searched the area where Carly was before her disappearance. The search included dogs, police divers examining the Hunter River and its surroundings, and aerial and trail bike patrols. And yet none of this helped to find any traces of Carly McBride. Months passed, but the investigation did not bring any results. Carly didn't leave any digital footprints. After she disappeared, she never turned on her phone. Her social media accounts were inactive, and she did not use bank cards. Investigators began to assume that Carly was no longer alive. 9 months after Carly's disappearance, her parents sought help finding their daughter. They were joined by Detective Timothy Seymour, who could contribute by requesting any information helpful to the case. Miss McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, shed tears during the public appeal and begged for help to find her beloved daughter. If you know anything, even if it's the smallest thing, please come forward and help us, she said. Steve and Lorraine said their family experienced difficulties after Carly's disappearance. We are coping the best we can, Mr. McBride said. As far as Carly's children are concerned, it's a fairly complex area. Both children have 2 different fathers, and to be honest, we haven't had too much close contact with those children. So we're just hoping that changes so we can have further contact with them. Detective Inspector Timothy Seymour said officers had worked tirelessly since Ms. McBride's disappearance. We have a plethora of information that we are sorting through. However, we are still appealing again, Inspector Seymour said. The breakthrough moment may come from somebody who might think they have an innocuous piece of information. Over time, Carly's parents started realizing that they would probably never see their daughter alive again. Lorraine wrote a heartbreaking letter addressing the man who robbed her of her daughter. I don't believe there is one person who does not now know what happened to my bub or hasn't noticed what has happened on that fateful day. Please help us for her children. They are innocent and gorgeous babies. Whoever you are, you have taken their mummy away. They are lifeline to fun times and happiness in their lives. Their tower of strength. They will never feel her soft, warm, and reassuring kisses and her big warm hugs with that big contagious belly laugh of hers and her radiant smile. Their memories are lost. They cannot say goodbye to her. Our pain, anguish, angst, and frustration are keeping us all down, causing us to wake up super vigilant that we might get a call to say they have found my bub. Whoever you are, you decided on that day to rip my daughter away from us. You decided on that day to rip my daughter away from us, you bottom-feeding runt. We are left with question after question after question. We don't know how to grieve or what we are grieving. We are in a kind of grief limbo. Our little beautiful poor babies need to know where their mommy is. They are the innocent victims in this horrible nightmare we are enduring. Please someone come forward so they can move on and grow into the amazing people their mommy would have wanted them to be. We can't honor and respect Carly's life until she is found. My daughter is reeling you in, and you will be a fine catch when you least expect it. This is my only wish, that we find my bub, that we can put her to rest. It is a basic human right with the dignity and respect that she deserves. Then her babies and their beautiful but broken hearts and heads can start to heal, and they may have a life without the anguish and pain and angst. You didn't give my daughter a chance. Please give her children the knowledge they ache for. William and Cadence should not be burdened with this pain. Please help us give them some semblance of grief and loss in their journey. Carly is a proud Aboriginal woman, as is her beautiful sister, and I am proud and honored to be their mother. No one deserves this in life, but my baby is reeling you in. You are breaking while we are aching. Your truth is Carly's truth, and in turn is our truth. Please someone speak up. Since the police couldn't link Carly's disappearance to her ex-partner, Andrew Easton, they turned their attention to another potential suspect, Sale Newson. During the investigation, they learned that the relationship between Carly and Sale was far from perfect. The man was very jealous, which was a frequent cause of their fights. Despite their relatively short relationship, Newsom told everyone he was deeply in love with Carly, mentioning she was the first woman he had fallen in love with in the last 14 years. He desperately asked for any information, participated in launching a Facebook page, offered financial rewards, and knocked on every door in the area where she was last seen. But notwithstanding these public statements of love and devotion, Newsom almost immediately started intimate relationships with other women. Besides, a few hours after reporting Carly missing, he offered sexual intercourse to several women. Carly disappeared on September 30th, and on October 2nd, Sale spent the night with another woman. But in public, he behaved like an inconsolable guy who had lost the love of his life. Detectives also discovered that Sale and Carly had an argument 2 days before her disappearance. The reason for this fight was Facebook messages that Carly allegedly received from other men. However, all this was only circumstantial evidence. They needed direct links to bring any charges against Sale Newson. In April 2015, the authorities searched properties at 3 addresses, one in Muswell Brook and the other 2 in Scone. Scone is a town in the Upper Hunter Shire in the Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. The distance from Scone to Muswell Brook is about 15 miles. During the searches, they seized 3 firearms and an unspecified amount of illegal substances and arrested a 24-year-old man, James Kinanian. However, the police stressed that the charges weren't related to the ongoing investigation into Carly's disappearance, and yet they did arise during this investigation. Thus, we should keep this name in mind. Almost 2 years have passed since Carly was last seen alive. The police continued to investigate, but there were no new clues to help solve the case. But then, suddenly, there was a breakthrough. On August 7, 2016, in a rural area near Scone, 2 local pedestrians found the remains in a shallow grave in a bush just a few feet from the road. Forensic examination confirmed that these were the remains of Carly McBride, a mother of 2 from Belmont, who went missing on September 30, 2014 in Muswellbrook. The police postponed the announcement of finding her body for 4 days, hoping to obtain additional evidence. Superintendent Guyana repeated police suspicions that they did not suspect Carly, 31, had been snatched off a street by a stranger. We don't believe that this was a random act, so we are looking into her past and as many people as we can find, he said outside Scone Police Station. But he stopped short of identifying any suspects in the case as it is all too fresh. It has taken us 2 years to get this breakthrough, and we have a fairly vast volume of fresh evidence that we need to evaluate in a thorough fashion, he said. We have put a lot of work into this in the past 2 years. The team here is pretty keen to solve this for Carly's family, and we have got so much new evidence now that it is going to take a lot of work. But we are well into it, he said. The heartbroken parents have told through tears of their desperate need for answers. Please come forward with anything, Lorraine sobbed. We still need to know who did this to my baby. The couple said they have had some closure now with her body being found, and we're extremely grateful for the police and public help to find their lost daughter. For 10 months, the investigators carried out extensive work, which resulted in the issued arrest warrant for Salomon Newson. On June 19, 2017, he was arrested and taken to a police station. Newson denied any involvement in the death of Carly McBride. However, Salomon Newson wasn't the only one who received charges. Police believed that 26-year-old James Cunin was the one who helped Newson dispose of the body. Carly McBride, Salomon Newson, and James Cunin met in a rehabilitation center for people with addiction to alcohol and illegal substances. Each one left the center at different times and for various reasons, but they stayed in touch. The trial of Salomon Newson began in August 2018 and protracted for several years because the police had only circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors alleged that Newson met with Carly after she left her ex-partner's house, struck her several blows to the head and back in a jealous rage, and threw her body away. Forensic experts have determined that Carly McBride died from multiple blunt force trauma. She suffered 23 fractures to her skull, 13 fractures to the torso, and spinal and rib fractures. The judge said Carly McBride suffered blunt force at the hands of Newson before she died. Judge Erase also noted how Newson had told interviewing police he was a skilled mixed martial arts fighter. His main sport was Thai boxing. I had 20 fights and 20 wins. I trained alongside world champions, but when I got really good, I got too old, he told police. I find the cause death was severe trauma to the brain due to a high degree of force to the deceased's head. The judge said, I am satisfied the offender caused death by the use of fists or feet or both or the use of objects. While searching Newson's house, police found the map in a shoebox under the bed. This map contained a drawn circle around the towns of Musselbrook and Scone. Carly's remains were found exactly in this radius. That map also had the numbers 1, 2, and 3 written on it in locations outside Musselbrook, with Senior Constable Mohini giving evidence that the first 2 numbers marked the location of point-to-point cameras. After the police found Carly's remains in 2016, Newson called her father, Steve. During the conversation, Newson mentioned that the found skeleton was missing hand bones, and yet the police never disclosed this information. The only people who knew about it were the police, Carly's parents, and the Department of Forensic Medicine at the John Hunter Hospital. As the authorities believed, Newsom knew about it because he was familiar with the crime scene, and he was the person who left Carly's body where they found it 2 years later. Moreover, the clothes on Carly's remains matched the ones she wore on the day of her disappearance. It suggested she died shortly after leaving her former partner's house. The police couldn't find her purse and phone. When police searched Newson's mobile phone, they discovered he had deleted Google location services between September 18 and October 2, 2014. During the trial, the investigators learned that the photo of Carly, which Newson took on the way to Musselbrook and later used in missing person flyers, was edited and cropped even before the police received the report of Carly missing. When the search for Carly began, Newson offered a $20,000 reward for information about her whereabouts. However, his bank account showed he was broke, which meant he offered the reward only because he knew no one would ever find her. Thus, he wouldn't have to pay. Newsom injected himself into the police investigation from the start, trying to deflect suspicion onto others and attempting to get information about where police and other emergency services would be searching. He also conducted a canvass of the neighboring streets searching for CCTV or witnesses, which police said was done not to find information but to suppress it and to determine if anyone had seen him intercepting Miss McBride. And while volunteers and police searched for her around Muswell Brook and handed out missing person flyers, Newson was in Sydney messaging friends about how he was driving an Audi R8. As well as that, Newson claimed to know the area where Miss McBride was found, like the back of my hand, and described it to Carly McBride's father, Steve McBride, despite only seeing footage of a fake crime scene set up by police. The images you are seeing now are not a real crime scene, but a staged one that the police used to see Nuisance reaction. The more investigators dug into Nuisance, interviewed him, looked at his Facebook messages, listened to his phone calls, the more he shone the light on himself. After examining his internet search history, investigators discovered that he was looking for information on how to delete a Facebook account. His account remained active, but Carly's account got deleted shortly after. Although all the evidence was circumstantial, the prosecutor said they did have puzzle pieces that began to reveal a picture when put together. Eventually, these pieces turned into an irrefutable case, ruling out any other possible explanations for how Carly McBride disappeared and how her body was about 82 feet from the side of the road. The judge concluded that the motive for the brutal and unplanned attack on Carly was Nuisance jealousy. After he picked Carly up from Musselbrook, he discovered she had spent about 90 minutes with her ex-partner instead of spending time with her daughter as was planned. Carly's daughter was not at home during that time, and the fact that she was alone with her ex-partner for an hour and a half allegedly ended with Newsom attacking Carly in a jealous rage. Miss McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, told a sentencing hearing that she lived in a blur of grief and anxiety for 2 years as she waited for her happy, gorgeous, and outgoing daughter to come home to her 2 young children. Instead, the next time she saw Carly was in the morgue, a day she tearfully described as the worst day of my life. Carly should be here living her life with her children, her sister, her father, and me. Miss Williams said, "After today, I never want to hear, speak, or see the man who took my beautiful daughter's life ever again. He no longer has any power to hurt me, and I refuse to think of him anymore. I will miss Carly for the rest of my life every second of every day," Miss Williams said. Almost 7 years after he reported Carly missing, 43-year-old Newsom was found guilty. In December 2021, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison with parole eligibility in 2038. After the sentencing, Newsom turned to the judge to restate his innocence. "I understand the verdict's been the verdict," he said. "Your Honor, I'm innocent. From the day I reported Carly missing to this very day, I've been compliant with the police, with the courts, with the jails, everything, and I've been found guilty of a crime that I did not commit. Someone out there has committed this crime, and it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And now I've got a big struggle ahead of me to try and clear my name through the courts after this." James Cunena, who helped Nuisance dispose of Carly McBride's body, denied his guilt. However, in July 2022, a jury found him guilty too. The judge said Cunin lied to police in 3 interrogations to create a false alibi for Nuisance and deleted data from the phone to cover his tracks. "Unfortunately, I couldn't find his picture, but it is known that when Cunin received charges in the Carly McBride case, he was already in prison for illegal weapons possession and prohibited substances." In November 2022, the 31-year-old Cunena showed almost no reaction when he was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison with a 4-year parole period. After the trial, Carly's parents said that although justice had prevailed and no matter the verdict, nothing would ever return their daughter. Ashley Renee Lyons was born on July 21, 1985, as the youngest of her parents' 3 children. A native of Scott County, she was a member of the Cedar Grove Baptist Church and graduated from Scott County High School in 2003, where she was highly involved in the FFA program. The letters FFA stand for Future Farmers of America, a dynamic youth organization that shapes lives and prepares members for leadership, personal growth, and career success through agricultural education. Ashley's brother, Chris, was just a year older, and together they ran a small car repair shop. Growing up, they not only repaired cars but also worked on anything with an engine. Ashley had a strong passion for cars, particularly the fast ones. However, her best friend, Bobby Gibson, knew that Ashley's interests went beyond just cars. She was in love with Roger McBeath. The teenagers in love broke up shortly after the prom but remained close friends. Even though they broke up, Ashley still thought Roger was the best. She was thrilled when she graduated high school, believing a better life awaited her. However, the lives of young people do not always turn out the way they plan. Ashley found out that she was pregnant, and the father of her child was Roger. She did not hide it from her family. Her whole family supported her, looking forward to the baby's birth. But January 7th, 2004, changed the lives of many people. That day started perfectly, but ended tragically. At the doctor's appointment, Ashley found out that she was going to have a son. She was happy when she shared this news with her mom, Carol. She even chose a name and wanted to name her son Landon. Ashley couldn't wait to share this exciting news with everyone. After showing her mom the ultrasound picture, she took a shower and did her makeup and hair. Ashley told her brother Chris and her mom Carol that she was going to Lexington. If we look at the map, we can see that Lexington is about 20 miles from Stamping Ground, and Ashley would have gotten there in about 35 or 40 minutes. She said she had plans to meet Roger and his parents at a restaurant there. Ashley was going to show them the ultrasound picture. It was cold that evening, and it was expected to snow later. Ashley's mom, Carol, offered to take her car, but she refused, saying she wasn't going for long and would be back before the snow started. Recalling that day, Carol said that the last words she heard from her daughter were, "I love you, Mom. I'll be back soon." But unfortunately, that night changed the lives of the Lyons family forever. After dinner, they heard the phone ring in their house. Chris answered it and heard Roger's voice asking if Ashley was home. Chris replied that she had already left. Roger said he would not be able to meet with Ashley. He said he called her, but she didn't answer the phone. Chris assumed that Ashley had left her phone in the car and gone to the restaurant. Time passed, but no one could get in touch with Ashley. Her mother called her several times, but she didn't answer. It was already 8 p.m., but Ashley still wasn't home. But when she left, she said she wasn't going for long. At about 9 p.m., Carol called Roger's mother and said that Ashley had not returned home after meeting them at the restaurant. Roger's mother's answer surprised Carol and made her even more worried. She said they did not see Ashley that day because the meeting had to be canceled. Upon hearing this, Carol was horrified. If her daughter wasn't at the restaurant, then where was she? Carol had a bad feeling. After all, Ashley wasn't answering her phone. A lot of thoughts raced through her mind as she tried to figure out where Ashley was and if she was okay. Around 10 p.m., Chris and his father decided they couldn't just sit and wait and went looking for Ashley. They knew which restaurant Ashley was supposed to meet Roger and his parents at. When they arrived there, they didn't see Ashley's car. They searched for Ashley for several hours, but she was nowhere to be found. At some point, Chris decided to check out Scott County Park because he knew Ashley liked that place. She fed the ducks there all the time and often went there with Roger when they were a couple. Looking at the map, we can see that Scott County Park is about 10 miles from Stamping Ground. While driving around the park, Chris and his father saw a car similar to Ashley's. The car was running and had the lights on. As they got closer, they realized it really was Ashley's car. It's hard to imagine what thoughts they had at that moment. Chris ran to the car and saw that the driver's side window was down. Ashley was sitting in the car with her head down. She was wearing a seat belt and was unresponsive. Chris opened the door and started shaking Ashley. He hoped she was just sleeping, but then Chris looked at his hand and saw blood. He immediately called 911. Unfortunately, by the time Chris called 911, Ashley was already dead and doctors couldn't help her. Soon after, Ashley's mom heard the worst news of her life. She couldn't believe Ashley was gone. While Ashley's family was overwhelmed with grief, the investigators arrived at the crime scene. Since Ashley was dead before the ambulance arrived and since it was evident that her death was the result of a crime, her body remained in the car until the investigators examined the scene for possible evidence. The first thing they noticed at the scene was that the engine was running, the heater and radio were on, and the driver's side window was down. They quickly determined the cause of Ashley's death. There were 3 9mm shell casings on the ground next to the car. Ashley had gunshot wounds to the head and neck. The police searched the park, but couldn't find the weapon of the crime. The fact that someone shot Ashley through the open side window of her car set a lock. It was chilly that night, and the fact that the window was down was suspicious. The position she was sitting in indicated that she was not trying to defend herself or escape. Putting all this together, the investigators concluded that Ashley knew the person who shot her. It was cold, and the heater in her car was on, which meant Ashley rolled down the side window when someone she knew approached her vehicle. Whoever shot her was standing next to the driver's door. Her purse, wallet, and phone were all in the car. Therefore, the investigators immediately ruled out the possibility that it was a robbery. Inside the car, there were ultrasound pictures scattered around, and apparently it was them that Ashley looked at in the last minutes of her life. She was 5 months pregnant, so the perpetrator took the life of not only Ashley, but also her son, Landon. Nothing like this had ever happened in Scott County before. Therefore, the community demanded that the police find the one who took 2 lives in such cold blood. The investigators learned from Ashley's parents that she planned to meet with Roger, the father of her child, on the day she died. They talked to Roger, and he was devastated by the death of Ashley and their unborn son. Roger admitted he and Ashley had their ups and downs. However, they were no longer a couple when Ashley found out she was pregnant. Roger was crying when he talked to the investigators. The man had no idea who could have done this to his ex-girlfriend and their unborn son. They brought him in for questioning. When asked about the events preceding Ashley's death, Roger told the investigators that they had planned to meet at a restaurant, but he had to cancel because he had other things to do. He wanted to tell Ashley not to come to Lexington, but she didn't answer her phone. He called her twice, but she didn't pick up. Therefore, Roger called her home, and Chris answered the phone. According to Roger, he asked to tell Ashley to call him back when she gets home. Roger's story matched what Chris had told the investigators about his sister's plans for that evening. When Carol found out that the police had questioned Roger, she did not believe that he could be involved in this crime. Carol said Roger was a nice guy. Their families were on good terms. When Roger had dinner at their house, he always helped clear the table. He got along well with Chris and was often at their home when he and Ashley were in a relationship. So no one believed that Roger could be the one who took the lives of Ashley and Landon. While the investigators were searching for clues in a suspect, Ashley's family tried to figure out who could have done it. Carol found a diary in her daughter's room. In it, she wrote down her experiences. Reading the diary, Carol noticed that one name kept coming up in it: Dina Williams. Dina was the same age as Ashley. They went to school together and rode the school bus together. Ashley felt sorry for Dina because she grew up in a poor family and always wore the same clothes. There were rumors that her parents treated her badly and even beat her, and Dina confirmed them in conversations with her friends. At first, Ashley and Dina were friends, but as it turned out, Dina was jealous of Ashley and wanted to have everything Ashley had, including Roger. In her diary, Ashley wrote that she and Dina had several quarrels. From this diary, Carol learned something she didn't know about. She had no idea Ashley and Dina had problems in their relationship. Therefore, Carol started suspecting that Dina Williams had something to do with Ashley's death. After Ashley and Roger broke up, Dina wasted no time and immediately began dating Roger. And perhaps Dina was worried because Ashley got pregnant with Roger's baby. After all, she didn't want to share Roger with anyone else. Dina wanted him all to herself. Maybe this could have pushed Dina to do something that cannot be undone. Carol gave Ashley's diary to the investigators so they could analyze everything written there. Carol was sure that the key to solving this case was somewhere in the pages of this diary. When the investigators reviewed Ashley's journal, they also became interested in how she described her relationship with Dina. Thus, Dina Williams was taken to the police station. She denied any involvement in what happened to Ashley. Dina worked at a bank, and according to her, they had an office party on the evening when the crime occurred, so she had an alibi. Dina did not try to hide her attitude towards Ashley from the investigators. She especially didn't like the fact that Ashley was pregnant. However, the fact that Dina did not feel anything about Ashley's death was not enough to bring any charges against her, so the investigators let her go home after the conversation. Meanwhile, the results of the ballistic examination came in. The experts analyzed the location of Ashley's wounds, the position she was found in, and where the casings lay. The angle at which the bullets entered Ashley's body allowed them to determine the approximate height of the shooter. They believed that the perpetrator was about 5 feet and 10 inches tall. Dina Williams' height was around 5 feet and 5 inches, which meant it was unlikely that she was the one who shot Ashley. However, Dina had a twin brother, Thomas Williams, who matched the alleged height of the perpetrator. According to rumors, a few months before Ashley's death, Thomas had asked several people about how to cause a miscarriage. People also said that Thomas did everything his sister asked him to do. The investigators became interested in this and questioned Thomas Williams, but he denied everything, and there was no evidence indicating his involvement in the crime, so he was released. While the police were putting all the evidence they had together to find the culprit, residents wanted to do something to show their support to Ashley's family. They created an improvised memorial with flowers, stuffed toys, and candles. Someone brought 2 crosses, one with Ashley's name and the other with Landon's. While the investigators were looking for new evidence, Ashley's family was preparing for the funeral. It is impossible to imagine what they had to go through because they lost 2 people at once. During the autopsy, the medical examiner removed the fetus from Ashley's body. Ashley and Landon were buried in the same coffin. The fact that the one who committed this crime was still at large made the Lyons family even more devastated. For information that could help arrest the one who took their daughter's life, Ashley's parents put out a $3,000 reward that eventually went up to $5,000. People started calling the police and telling them what they thought might help the investigation. Soon after, they received a call from a woman whose house windows overlooked the park where someone shot Ashley. She reported that she may have seen the perpetrator. Standing at the window, this woman saw someone run out of the park and jump over the fence. Next, the person she saw ran up to a red pickup truck waiting for them with the engine running and got into the passenger seat. Moments later, the truck sped away. According to the witness, it was a red Chevrolet pickup truck. If the person the woman saw really had something to do with Ashley's death, then investigators had to look for not one criminal, but at least 2. After all, whoever was driving the red pickup truck could be an accomplice to the crime. Upon hearing about the red pickup truck, everyone who knew Ashley immediately realized who was behind it. Roger, her ex-boyfriend, the father of her unborn child, had such a car. The police immediately seized Roger's truck. They thoroughly searched it, but found no evidence inside. Roger refused to talk to the investigators, and there was no evidence against him. However, knowing that at least 2 people were involved in the crime, the officers made an obvious conclusion. Who didn't like Ashley? Who wasn't happy about her pregnancy? Who would be happy if Ashley disappeared? Besides Roger, there was only one person who could wish for this, and this person was Dina Williams. That's why the investigators decided to have another conversation with Dina and her brother, Thomas. They questioned Thomas first. During the first conversation with the police, Thomas denied everything. But now, having learned that the eyewitness saw Roger's pickup truck at the crime scene, he became more talkative. When asked if he knew who shot Ashley Lyons, he immediately replied without hesitation that it was Roger McBeath. Thomas Williams eventually made a deal with the investigation to secure a less severe sentence for himself. He confessed that he had given Roger the gun, and Roger was the one who shot Ashley. Thomas also told the investigators that after taking Ashley's life, Roger threw the weapon in Elkhorn Creek. It took a lot of time for the police to find the crime weapon, but the 6-hour dive search was successful. The ballistics examination confirmed that the gun the police found was the weapon of their crime. The investigators knew that it wasn't Dina who shot Ashley because she didn't match the height of the perpetrator. However, they questioned her again, and she confessed that she was the getaway driver on the evening when Roger committed the crime. The police arrested Roger McBeath, Dina Williams, and her twin brother Thomas. It became clear that Roger did not want Ashley to have the baby, but Ashley was happy. She wanted to become a mother, and her family supported her decision to have this child. So Roger came up with an insidious plan. He invited Ashley to meet him and his parents at a restaurant to lure her to Scott County Park. Dina Williams drove him there, and he walked up to Ashley's car with a gun in his hand. Seeing the father of her unborn child, Ashley rolled down the window and reached into her purse to get the ultrasound pictures. She didn't expect him to shoot her. By pulling the trigger 3 times, Roger took the life of both Ashley and his own son. Then he ran out of the park, got into the pickup truck, and told Dina to hit the gas. On the way, they made a stop and got rid of the gun, throwing it into the river. When it became known who was behind this crime, the residents of Stamping Ground were shocked. They didn't expect that someone they knew would be capable of such a brutal crime. Equally frightening was the fact that several people were involved in this. Roger McBeath pleaded not guilty. In preparing for the trial of McBeath, the authorities made a mistake, ultimately influencing the verdict, but I'll tell you about this at the end of the video. As for Thomas Williams, the court sentenced him to 7 years in prison for his involvement in this crime. In the plea agreement, Williams admitted he accepted $1,000 from Roger McBeath Jr. to injure Ashley Lyons in such a way that it would cause her to miscarry. The act was never carried out, with Williams then agreeing to give McBeath the gun used in the murder according to court records. In 2005, Dina Williams pleaded guilty. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors have recommended Williams serve a total of 20 years in prison, making her eligible for parole after she has served 85% or 17 years of her term. During the trial, prosecutors planned to put several witnesses on the stand who claimed Williams said she wished Ashley Lyons was dead, had plotted with McBeath to poison Ashley, and had offered people $1,000 to cause Ashley to miscarry by beating her up, the court document said. According to prosecutors, Williams and McBeath resorted to more drastic measures after their original plans failed. Williams said her attorney, public defender Rodney Barnes, told her a jury would probably have found her guilty. "I'm hurt, and I'm scared because I pleaded guilty to something that I didn't do," she said. Williams acknowledged she took McBeath to the park the night of Ashley's murder so he could view the ultrasound pictures of the couple's unborn son, but said she drove around the Colony subdivision while they met and later came to pick him up. She heard 3 gunshots during her drive, but at the time, she did not know what they were, Williams said. "He involved me in the plan without me knowing," Williams said of McBeath. Williams said Roger then called Ashley Lyons on his phone, telling her he loved her and was sorry he had missed meeting her at the park. The jury heard the recording of this message at McBeath's trial. According to Williams, when leaving the park, McBeath never told her that Ashley Lyons was dead, and she never told police about what had happened for fear of what McBeath would do, saying he was abusive toward her. "I was scared to death of that boy," Williams said. "He even threatened to kill me." Williams said she regretted everything that happened and felt terribly for the Lyons family. "I am so sorry," Williams said, crying. "I wish I could go back and change this." However, McBeath's parents, Roger Sr. and Rita, said that Williams was lying, calling her a compulsive liar who often acted in the heat of the moment. The couple said Williams was jealous of Ashley and had agreed to the plea deal to take the easy way out. "She was obsessed with my son," Rita McBeath said. "She was the one who had the motive." When they later got the call that Ashley Lyons was dead, Roger McBeath Sr. said his son was in shock, but Williams was unfazed. "It didn't bother her," he said of Williams. "It didn't bother her a bit." In August 2005, the court sentenced Dina Williams to 20 years in prison. She was released on parole in 2021. In the written motion, Williams said she was very young and easily persuaded by her then-boyfriend, McBeath. Williams also said she had no knowledge of the relationship between McBeath and Lyons. Furthermore, Williams said she was not the main offender of the crime and has already served approximately 70% of her sentence for her role in the crime. Williams noted in the court filing that she had completed various programs in prison, including courses on anger management, resident legal aid training, horticulture landscaping, and how to be a certified Braille transcriber. After his arrest, Roger pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. The jury convicted him, but he managed to get his conviction overturned by the Kentucky Supreme Court because a jail informant overstepped his bounds by questioning McBeath in jail about the shooting, and the defense was not allowed to question the informant. John Romano, a jail informant, was instructed by the police not to ask Roger McBeath questions about the crime he was accused of. The informant was allowed to have ordinary conversations with McBeath about everyday things such as sports and movies. The police hoped McBeath would start talking about the crime himself without the leading questions. The Kentucky Supreme Court ruled prosecutors used illegally obtained evidence and overturned the verdict. In 2009, Roger was retried, and this time, he pleaded guilty to complicity to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. The court then handed him a 42-year prison sentence with eligibility for parole in 16 years. The court also sentenced him to 5 years for complicity to evidence tampering, which would run concurrently with his previous sentence. McBeath's parole hearing took place in December 2023. She was my high school sweetheart. She was the mother of my child. She was someone I loved, said McBeath. McBeath told the parole board he was not interested in parole. I'm not here to convince you all to give me parole. I know I don't deserve it, said McBeath. But I do want to use this time to say that I'm truly sorry for what I did. I want to tell Ashley's family that I'm truly sorry for what I did. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it. McBeath said he didn't wish to continue the hearing after declining his parole eligibility. Thus, he is currently still in prison. In honor of Ashley Lyons, Scott County Park, where she died, now has the Angel Garden with ceramic angel statues. After Ashley's death, Carol and her husband, Buford Lyons, helped pass a fetal homicide law at both the state and federal levels. Under the bill, violence against a pregnant woman is considered two crimes, one against the woman and the other against her unborn child. Ezra Orin and her husband, Oscar, were of Turkish descent but had settled in London with their families. Around 2007, they moved to Ireland for work and lived in Clondalkin, West Dublin. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Eamon, and Ezra took time off work to care for him. On February 23, 2011, just days before her 38th birthday, Ezra was busy preparing for the visit of her mother and mother-in-law from London the next day. At approximately 7:15 a.m., she told Oscar she was going to a local shop to buy milk and that she would return in time for him to take the car to work. However, she did not come back. After several hours, Oscar reported her missing. At 11 p.m. that night, Ezra and Oscar's car was found parked in a lot near the sea in Bray, County Wicklow. Her purse was locked in the trunk, and there was no sign of Ezra. Ezra's phone was never found, but the last signal from it came from the far side of Brayhead, some distance from where the car was located. There were multiple pieces of surveillance footage of Ezra's car, a gray Renault Twingo, from the day she disappeared. The car was first spotted at a roundabout, for minutes away from their home, but not until 40 minutes after she left. It was later seen on cameras in Bray, driving erratically, nearly colliding with a Skoda Octavia. The parking lot where the car was found had cameras, but none captured the specific spot where it was parked. Despite the fact that her car was found in Bray, there is no evidence that Ezra ever actually made it there. In all of the surveillance footage of the car, the quality of the footage is not good enough to show who is driving it. There were public appeals for the driver of the Skoda Octavia that almost collided with Ezra's car to come forward in hopes that they could confirm or deny if Ezra had been driving her car at the time. But they were unsuccessful and the driver has never been identified. It is possible that something is no footage showing who got out of Ezra's car in Bray. There is footage showing one angle of the lot where it was found. Authorities believe that there is one woman in the footage who could be Ezra. They say that the woman is walking without purpose and that she is never seen in any of the footage walking back to the parking lot. Ezra's family has seen the footage and they do not believe that it is her. Upon closer inspection of the footage, a small dog is visible. Ezra's family believes that the woman is walking the dog, visible. Ezra's family believes that the woman is walking the dog, and she seems like she isn't moving with purpose because she is waiting for the dog as it runs around. She does not necessarily have to return to the parking lot because she may live close by and walked home. A few months after Ezra went missing, her husband made the decision to move back to London with their son to be closer to family. While Oscar wanted to remain in Ireland to help keep pressure on investigators to work the case, he was afraid of what might happen if he had some sort of health crisis or accident, since he was the only relative his son, Eamon, had in Ireland. The main contact with the media for Ezra's family has been Ezra's sister, Berna Faden. Berna makes as many television and radio appearances as she can and uses her vacation days from her job in the UK to travel to Ireland to post flyers and follow leads in her sister's case. On the first anniversary of Ezra's disappearance in 2012, her niece, Ada, joined Berna on her trip to Ireland to post flyers. She took one into a chip shop in Neilstown, where Ezra had been a regular customer. As Ada left the shop, a worker ran out after her with a set of keys. On the key ring, there were pictures of Ezra, her son, and her husband. The car key was confirmed to be for Ezra's car. The keys had been left on the counter before Christmas of 2011, and the shop owner had kept them in case someone came back looking for them. There was no security footage of who left the keys on the counter. Ezra had lost a set of keys 6 months prior to her disappearance around November 2010, but her sister does not believe that the keys found in the shop were the set. The security footage of Ezra's car driving in Bray was sent to the UK in 2018 in hopes that it could be enhanced enough to identify who was driving the car. The effort was unsuccessful. Ezra remains missing 8 years after her disappearance. Connor and Sheila Dwire lived in Vermoy, County Cork, where they had raised 2 sons. 62-year-old Connor had worked a variety of jobs throughout his life, including working as a plumber and a driver. In 1991, he was working part-time as a chauffeur for German businessman Fritz Wolf when he was in Ireland. 60-year-old Sheila was described by neighbors as lovely, but somewhat reserved. The couple was last seen on April 30th, 1991, walking into St. Patrick's Church to attend a funeral. The following day, Sheila spoke on the phone with one of her sisters. Sheila was very close with both of her sisters, Nellie and Maisie, and spoke with them frequently. Maisie was therefore concerned about Sheila when she did not hear from her after May 1st. On May 18th, she went to the Dwire's Chapel Hill home and knocked on the door, but got no response. She returned the next day with the Gardaí, who forced entry into the home out of concern that something had happened to the couple. Connor and Sheila were not inside their home. Gardaí did find the couple's passports, reading glasses, and £1,000 in cash hidden in a biscuit tin. The only items missing from the home were a few pieces of clothing, presumably because Sheila and Connor had been wearing them, and the couple's white Toyota Cressida. Extensive searches have never found any sign of the Dwires or their car. Their bank accounts have not been accessed since their disappearance. There were reported sightings of the couple in France and Germany over the years, but none of them have ever been confirmed despite cooperation from Interpol to investigate them. The Dwires did not have their passports, and ferry records do not show their car being transported abroad. A year prior to the couple's disappearance, another person from Vermoy went missing. 54-year-old Billy Fennessy was last seen on March 30th, 1990. Like the Dwires, his car went missing with him. There was no sign of Billy for the next 22 years until October 2012. A car with human remains inside was found at the bottom of the River Blackstone during a routine dive by the Blackwater Sub Aqua Search and Rescue Team. The car was the same make and model as Billy's. And in May 2013, DNA results confirmed that it was indeed Billy found inside of it. Of the car, renewed concerns that the Dwires may also have accidentally driven into the river at a still unknown location. While various waterways were searched during the course of the investigation, Billy Fennessy's car went undetected during these searches. So it stands to reason that the Dwire's car could still be hidden underwater. For now, the cause of the couple's disappearance remains a mystery. 41-year-old Johan Johnson is a father of 4 children who works as a taxi driver in his native Iceland. On February 8, 2019, he traveled to Dublin to participate in a poker tournament. His fiancée was supposed to come with him, but she was delayed when she had issues with her passport. Jan played a game of poker that night, and his fiancée arrived in Dublin the following morning, February 9th. She went to the hotel they were booked at, the Hotel Bonington, and woke Jan up. While his fiancée was having coffee at the bar in the hotel, Jan walked outside. It is not known why he left the hotel. He never returned. His passport, phone, and wallet were all left behind in his hotel room, and there has been no activity on his bank account. When Jan was not found within 2 days, 12 friends and family members flew to Dublin from Iceland to help search for him. The area around the Hotel Bonington was methodically searched and covered in missing persons posters. According to his family, it would be out of character for John to have simply just walked away from his life and left them wondering where he was. He was very responsible and considerate and would call home if he ever worked late. He had lost money in the poker game he played the night before he went missing, but not a large enough amount of money that his family believed it would have caused undue stress for him. Surveillance footage helped trace Jan's route after he left his hotel. He left the hotel at 11 o'clock and 5 seconds a.m. and was picked up on a camera at McGettigan's bar 2 minutes later. He is seen going on to Swords Road heading north. The last sighting of Jan was outside of Highfield Hospital, where he was seen heading north towards Collins Avenue. On February 23rd, an intensive large-scale search was conducted with the help of 80 volunteers. During a radio interview, one of Jan's brothers thanked the people of Dublin for their assistance in their search efforts and also vowed that his family would not leave Dublin without Jan. Jan so far remains missing. 36-year-old Shaun Duffy lived in rural Menacross, Dunglow. He had a burly build and stood at 6 foot 4 inches tall and was described by one of his neighbors as a tank of a man. He used his imposing figure in some of his odd jobs as a bouncer. He made his living doing a variety of other things as well, including working as a driver and an undertaker. While he was known for being physically imposing, he was also notable for his sense of style, usually going out in a tweed jacket and tie. He was close to his large family, including his 2 brothers and 5 sisters. Shaun spent the evening of January 28, 2005 out at the Strand Bar with his brother Kevin, not returning home until the early hours of January 29th. Later that day, Kevin went to see Shaun and was surprised to find the front door of Shaun's small bungalow unlocked. When he went inside, he found Shaun's body lying face down on the couch. He had been stabbed, beaten, and had an arrow from a crossbow sticking out of his right arm. In the course of the investigation into Shaun's death, over 1,400 lines of inquiry were pursued and authorities interviewed over 700 witnesses. Shaun's multiple jobs and varied hobbies, while they made him an interesting character, gave authorities lots of leads to follow up on. While Shaun cared about his community and took time to help his elderly neighbors, his diverse interests also included things that could be construed as dangerous enough to become motives for his murder. His own mother has said that Shaun had a lot of enemies and there were concerns over his dealings with horse races and the buying and reselling of cars. At the time of his death, Shaun also had an assault charge pending against him. It has been theorized that multiple assailants must have been involved in Shaun's murder. Given his size and strength, he would be difficult for one person to physically overpower. The use of multiple weapons also supports this theory. Following the 14th anniversary of Shaun's murder in 2019, LaGuardia appealed to the public for information with Detective Inspector Pat O'Donnell, reminding the community that it is never too late to come forward with information in the case. O'Donnell also announced that evidence from the case is being re-examined in hopes that the advances in technology, since John's death, will result in a DNA profile that will help move the case forward. Yvonne Waters, 17, and Raylene Eaton, 16, were cousins who lived in Perth, Western Australia, and shared a close bond, spending much of their free time together. On Sunday, April 4th, 1974, they went to the tavern at the White Sands Hotel in nearby Scarborough to listen to a band. However, neither girl returned home that night. At first, their mothers were not overly concerned. While it was unusual for the girls to stay out all night, their mothers initially thought they might have spent the night at each other's homes. But when both women realized their daughters were absent from both households, they feared something was terribly wrong. The police, however, did not immediately share the family's concerns. They assumed the girls had run away or were staying with someone they had met at the hotel. It wasn't until several days later that the police began questioning witnesses who had been at the White Sands Hotel that afternoon. Numerous people who had been there that day reported that Yvonne and Raylene had been spending time with 3 men who appeared to be in their early to mid-20s. They also may have been laborers based on their attire. The doorman at the hotel bar told police that Raylene and Yvonne went out into the parking lot with the 3 men around 6:45 p.m. The group of 5 was seen standing around a white hold and panel van. The van had plates from Queensland, and the plate number began with the letters PXJ. It is unclear if the girls got inside or left in the van. Police were unable to trace down the van despite having the partial plate number. Just 10 days after the girls' disappearance, Raylene's only sibling, her 18-year-old brother, Graham, was involved in a motorcycle accident. 2 weeks later, he passed away in the hospital from his injuries. Raylene's mother, Jean, now 95, continues to appear publicly and give press interviews in hopes of finding answers to the disappearance of her daughter and niece. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.